bit about where we're going in a little bit. So most of you know this, but early on in the pandemic, we had to make the very difficult decision to move essentially over half the people that were staying in shelter out of the shelter. So we moved from 175 to 88 people at the Pavarello Center to allow for 6 feet of space in between all sleeping spaces. So as a result, we are very diminished in our shelter capacity. And so as we moved into winter, we knew that we needed to come up with a new plan. And so every year for the past couple of years, we've operated a winter shelter at the Salvation Army, but unfortunately the capacity, while needing to provide for that social distancing, was not going to work. And so we moved into the Johnson Street Community Center. It's on the corner of North and Johnson, where we've been operating winter shelter since the beginning of November. The capacity for that location is 150 people. And Claire's going to talk a little bit more about the utilization of that space as this winter has gone on. What we're facing right now is that we, went into a contract with the city to operate that shelter for 5 months, which means at the end of March, we are going to be ending winter shelter. We have huge concerns about that because that means that all the folks who are staying there will no longer have anywhere to go. And the Pavarello Center is full every night. And so at this point, our understanding is that according to CDC guidelines, we're going to need to keep providing that social distancing kind of indefinitely. We're not sure when that will change. I imagine as more people become vaccinated, some of the CDC's guidelines may change, but I know that they're very cautious around congregate settings like ours. So we're extremely concerned about that, and we're going to be talking through that today in this update. I also just wanted to share that we are facing a lot of specific needs around that. Hot Team is going to be talking a little more about that. What we're looking at, though, is over 100 people having nowhere to go at the end of this month. So it's really concerning. I think as a community, we should be concerned about this. I think that the neighborhoods all over our community are going to be impacted by this change at the end of the month. So other factors that we're seeing is housing is, continues to be really challenging in our community. It was hard before the pandemic, and it seems much more challenging now, especially as people move into our community because of the pandemic, and opportunities for working from home have increased. At this time, we know that we have 10 to 15 folks that our homeless outreach team is working with who have vouchers but cannot find anywhere to live. It's just so challenging to find an open apartment for folks with a paid housing voucher. Their rent will be guaranteed. That's a stable source of payment for them. And unfortunately, we're not able to find them housing. It's been really, really challenging. So moral of the story is this all feels like doom and gloom. And unfortunately, it is what it is right now. And so next, I'm going to have Claire, our shelter manager. Hopefully her audio is working. Do you want to test it really quick, Claire?
Yeah.
Okay, good. It's working. Fantastic. So Claire is going to take over and just talk a little bit about winter shelter and how that's been going for us this winter.
Thanks, Amy. My name is Claire. I'm the shelter manager at the Pavarello Center, and Jesse had asked me to talk a little bit about what is going on at Johnson Street and at the PAV. As Amy said, we have a cap at the Pavarello Center, and because of social distancing measures, and we are operating the second location in the Franklin to the Fort neighborhood. We have generally, since we opened in November, have been sleeping. It started off slow, 30 people a night, 40 people a night. And then by December, we were regularly serving around 90 to 100 people each night over there on North and Johnson. And then this month we were super nervous about the cold snap a couple weeks ago. I don't have a date, but and in preparation for that cold snap, we really tried to remove as many barriers to accessing shelter as possible. So people who maybe had behavior issues in the past were giving a second chance. And just really trying to get as many people in the doors as possible. So a couple of weeks ago, we served a total of 137 people over at Johnson Street, which is a lot considering our cap is 150 people. And then since then, we're seeing, we don't see that we've gone back down to 90. So our numbers climbed and then have really stayed kind of high. And I'm reminded of the temporary safe outdoor space and other agencies with hotel vouchers. Um, and it is kind of overwhelming to think about, even with those resources, how many people are unsheltered in our community. Um, I don't have much else to say. Are there any questions?
Yeah, this is a break. If people have got any questions, either for Amy or Claire, next is going to be the hot team talking. But if you've got questions just about how winter shelter has been going so far, that'd be great.
Well, I have
Jim,
a
will you
question.
ask your question?
Yeah, Claire,
Yep.
it mentioned there that you had a 5-month contract with the city. Now, is it the city that owns that property?
Yes, and this might actually be a better question for Amy, but that is my understanding.
Yeah, but isn't it possible you could maybe, get another a month or two extension on that? Because, because what else is the city going to use it for in the meantime? They don't have anything else it needs to be used for right now, I would think.
Yeah, Jim, that's a good question. And certainly that is one factor. It is owned by the city. They've owned it for a couple of years now. It does sound like their intention of that location is eventually to do some development there. So they do intend, after we're done using it, to demolish it. We just don't know when that will be. The other factor in considering extending winter shelter is a financial factor. And so it is something that we've certainly explored. And if something comes up, we may have the opportunity to do that. But at this time, our plan is to end at the end of this month.
Yeah. Now, does the church, does the city collect some kind of a rental from you guys to use that space?
Good question. So no, they have been generous in offering us essentially a lease for $0. So we're responsible for maintaining the property, but we don't have to pay anything to use that space.
Steve, I have a
Lynn,
question in the chat about the number of unsheltered folks.
Yeah, let's come back to that. Lynn had her hand up. Lynn, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. It was a similar question. Just wondering if you have a sense, Claire, of where those 40 people have gone. If they've left Missoula, if they're out on the streets, what was their solution?
I think that's a really good question, and I don't know. I don't have a great answer. I think a lot of people who have stayed with us and when it's extremely cold might be living out of their cars or camping either in town or in, Missoula County kind of area. And when the cold becomes just so unbearable, they come into shelter and we serve them, and then they go on their way. The shelter isn't as comfortable as we try and make it. It can be challenging for a lot of people, and some people would rather not be around 115 other people. But the hot team might have a better sense of where folks go.
Yeah, and I'll ask the hot team to address that question when they're up next. Is just if you could talk add to your conversation, Christy and Sue, a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of unsheltered numbers right now. I know they're a little lower than normal, but just wanted you guys to talk through that. Bill, you had a question?
Yeah, just quickly for Amy or Claire, when you say you have residents at Poverello or clients, how were you determining who got to stay at the Poverello and who had the option of Johnson? And are there certain needs different between the Poverello overnighters and the Johnson Center overnighters?
So we this year have made a, a decision to keep the Poverello Center a higher barrier shelter compared to Johnson Street. So we've really worked at Johnson Street to provide what we call low barrier shelter. So we do allow folks to stay in that location as long as their behavior is safe. So that means they could be under the influence of drugs or alcohol while staying there. And the goal there is to just reduce as many barriers as possible to bring people inside. And what we find too is when people are able to come inside, that gives us an opportunity to connect with them and connect them with resources. It also is just a best practice in this work to do that. So I would say that's the biggest difference between the two locations. Also, we found in the past when we've lowered barriers at the POV and then at the end of winter shelter had to increase barriers, it's been really, really challenging for guests and staff to suddenly change that policy overnight and to start having different expectations of people. So we're trying that out this year as a different way of doing things. I'll also say at the Poverello Center, we do have a process that we utilized at the beginning of the pandemic to prioritize beds. So we really thought about really who is most vulnerable for COVID, and then prioritize those beds for folks that fit into those categories that we're all familiar with in the news, folks who are older, folks who have complex medical histories, that kind of thing, and really prioritize those beds at the POV for that purpose. So that's how we've gone about things throughout the pandemic, and we'll continue to do so after the after winter shelter ends.
Carissa, and then after Chris asks her question, then I'm going to have, we'll move on to the next topic.
Thank you. And I actually don't have a question. I apologize. I just want to give a quick statement about the Johnson Street facility. And I had the chance to go there to do some work in late December. And I just really want to acknowledge the hard work that the staff are doing there. It's really incredible to see the dignity and respect that they provide some of our highest risk, highest challenge community members. And I just really want to give them a huge shout out for the care and support that they're giving these folks.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. All right, Christy and Sue, you are up. I don't know who's taking the lead first, but we'll let you talk about your part.
I see, I can read your lips, Christy. She's going, Sue. I'm Sue Ellerman. I'm on the homeless outreach team. And I think the biggest thing for the homeless outreach team at this point is that we have increased our team to 7 people. We were able to do that with some, I think, COVID funding. Yes, nodding heads. And those, let's see, I think 5 of those positions the funding will end in June, end of June. But while we have them and hopefully we can continue with them, we're planning to expand our hours. We're expanding our outreach. We are really focusing right now on the closure of Johnson Street Shelter at the end of this month. Trying to work with people to figure out where they can go. The Reserve Street encampment is up in the air. We're not sure if people can go back there or if that area is going to be closed. So if not there, then where? The SOS camp out on 93 is full and has a waiting list. So in the meantime, we're having conversations with people. We're setting up a regular time to meet with people at Johnson Street that, usually sleep outside. And we're hoping to at least maintain or create a way to maintain communication with them once they leave. We are putting together emergency kits and looking for donations for all the gear that we normally need to give people, the sleeping bags and tarps and tents and hand warmers and socks and shoes and, basic winter gear. And let's see, I think that's all I can think of right at this second.
I also just want to, go ahead, Sue.
Well, go ahead.
I was just also going to point out to the folks that are listening today that I think sometimes we take for granted thinking about people who are living unsheltered outside on how difficult it is for us to make contact with them. So Sue mentioning that, it's important for us to kind of make a plan for how to reach out to them. if somebody doesn't have a phone and they are being moved from place to place, if an encampment is cleared, or if they're not able to stay in a certain shelter, it becomes very hard to connect people with resources and to do that consistent follow-up. We do take notes on kind of where people are staying, if they're staying, under this sign or around this corner or what have you, but it's really challenging to connect people. So it's ideal if people can be in one location. So this kind of event where 100 people are going to be displaced, it's going to make hot teams work so much harder to then go about the business of trying to figure out where to find people again and to continue the work that they've already started while they're in shelter. So it creates this huge barrier for us and for them in connecting them with housing as quickly as possible.
Mhm. And Sue or Christy, could you talk a little bit about like the numbers we're seeing unsheltered right now? That would be helpful.
I don't think that we have exact numbers. I know that the numbers have decreased in the camps right now and downtown, but I believe that's only because we have Johnson Street and a lot of our clients are coming to Johnson Street for food and a place to sleep. I know that as soon as the weather gets nicer and Johnson Street closes, that they're all going to be right back where they were. Normally on a sunny spring day, you can find 30 to 50 people downtown at the courthouse, and right now that's not happening because of Johnson Street. A lot of it. It's not that they've gotten housed at all. It's not like they have a place to go. I think that what Amy said was, it's been great having everyone in one spot. And we've been able to get people vouchered up, a few people vouchered up. Like she said, there's no housing. But because they've been here, we can keep track of them and get their ID and do the things we do. And with Johnson Street closing in a month, like, it worries us that we're not going to be able to keep track of those people, and those vouchers are going to go, they'll lose their chance at that voucher. We do have a story of a guy that has lived down at the camps for quite a while. And I've known him for the whole 6 years that I've been at the POV, and he's been at the Reserve Street camps, and we've tried to get him housed before, and that wasn't happening. And he came into Johnson Street when it was really cold, and he now has a voucher in hand and looking for an apartment.
But as Christy says, we need housing, and we'll get a little bit to that issue and our thinking around that moving forward. Thanks, Christy and Sue. Do anybody have any questions for them before we kind of move on to what's going to happen with winter shelter next year and talking through a little bit what the next few months and up to a year are going to look like?
It looked like Lynn had a question in the chat about Reserve Street.
Yeah, Lynn, go ahead and ask your question.
Sure, sorry. I'm just curious. I noticed, I think yesterday, a bunch of heavy equipment clearing out Reserve Street. And I'm just wondering, is that just the first step of a permanent closure and putting up fences? Do you have any info about that?
It was actually just a regular cleanup that April Seat directed, that got going. She does a few of those a year, and that's all that was. I think they just had heavy equipment this time and got to get more stuff out.
And I believe that particular cleanup was in partnership with the Department of Transportation. So I know they were working together on that, but I don't know more specifics.
And then just one other quick question. Have you thought about, I'm sure you've thought about, but have you talked about using the food bank as a way to reach some of those people now that they're out of the shelter? If maybe there's some way that if that's where they'll be coming for food, that the food bank could help?
Yeah, we partner really closely with the food bank. It's a great point. We partner closely with them, and our homeless outreach team has actually, in the past, maintained regular hours at the food bank to catch people. And so I think that's certainly a great point, and maybe something. I'm not sure if the hot team is planning on that for their outreach in the coming months, but I think that would be really smart if we're not.
I think that we are. It's just we have pulled out there because of COVID. We used to do hours at the library also. And just because of COVID, no one is comfortable doing that. But when we can, we'll be back there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point and would be a good place for us after winter shelter closes to spend some time for sure. It's a great point, Lynn. Thank you.
Any other questions before Amy talks a little bit more about like what 2021 is going to look like in terms of winter shelter? What planning is that for that?
So something people probably don't know is that the Poverello Center thinks about winter all year round. It is something that we worry about all the time. I'm already worried about next winter, and we're not done with this winter yet. It's an occupational hazard, I guess. So in terms of next year, it is so hard to know what it's going to look like. Obviously, this past year, we had to very quickly come up with a plan that was very different than our usual plan. Our usual plan being the Salvation Army. That space is really well equipped for the folks that we serve. We serve the same folks. And so they have washers and dryers and showers and nice big open spaces. So what happened last year was that I literally wrote up this time last year 6 different budgets for 6 different scenarios that winter shelter might look like. And we are going to be in the same place again. I am, thinking we need to absolutely plan for a worst case scenario, which would be a similar setup as Johnson Street. We don't know if this space will be available because they are looking at demolishing it in the coming year or so. But that being said, it's such a challenge for us to set up a winter shelter in a place like Johnson Street. The facility is really not made for the services that we're providing. We've had to bring in porta potties. We've had to bring in a mobile shower trailer, all of which have so many complex details that have been a huge headache. Also, something like Johnson Street has been a huge financial change. So normally winter shelter costs us around $150,000 a year operating it like we have in the past. This year, it was probably closer to $650,000 to operate. We are operating at 24 hours a day because places that people normally would get warm during the winter are not allowing folks to spend time there. The library has not reopened. That was a common place for people to get warm, and people are obviously just a little bit more concerned about having people come sit down and stay warm. So we proposed this winter shelter this year to be 24 hours for that purpose. So I'm assuming we're going to have to look at a similar setup for next year unless something radically changes. So at this point, we don't really know what it's going to look like, but we just wanted to share that it's just this very complex process that we spend essentially the entire year planning for. And we don't really know what it's going to look like. What we do know is that the CARES Act funding that helped us to provide this expanded shelter this year will likely not be available next winter. And so things may have to look radically different, and we may only be able to offer overnight or something like that. So depending on that budget and what funding is available will really dictate that. We do have the benefit of working closely with the city and county who have contributed for the past couple of winter shelters, $50,000 a year from each entity. That has helped a lot. But if you think about that $600,000 mark, it's only really a fraction of what we need. So those are the factors that we are dealing with and looking at as we move into planning for next year. So I just share that with you all as our close supporters, so you understand kind of what we're looking at, and so we can all work together to come up with a good plan for our community going into next winter. Any questions about that? There's so many questions about that, frankly, but any questions I might be able to answer.
Amy, what about, you mentioned hotel vouchers. I would think that during COVID, there'd be a lot more empty rooms in hotels in Missoula. It's not an answer necessarily for next winter, but is that any part of the solution now? And do you think that it will continue to be an option in the future?
Hotel vouchers are an option. It's tricky depending on where the funding comes from those. So for example, ESG, Emergency Solutions Grant, that's through the Human Resource Council, can be used for hotel vouchers, but you have to be able to provide proof that there is not enough shelter space. And so that's possible for us to do, but just comes with kind of some complication there. It is also challenging in terms of relationships with hotels. Sometimes they're not interested in working with us because of, I would say, issues around NIMBYism, people not feeling comfortable working with the population that we serve. And so I think there's a barrier there for us as well. We currently, the Poverello Center is currently partnering with a local motel to put our veterans in some of those rooms, so we don't have a double occupancy rooms to reduce the risk of COVID. So we have had some success with that, but it is not without its hurdles, that's for sure.
All right. Zach, do you want to talk a little bit about getting re-engaged in volunteerism and that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I know some of you have been on the previous meetings and stuff, so I'm sorry if I am going to repeat some of this information. But long story short, we need volunteers year round. And this year has been pretty challenging, or at least 2020 was, because of COVID. Naturally a decrease in our community volunteer base, but also within the building, and even more of an urgency to deliver our essential programs, shelter, food, and outreach. And so we've just been kind of chipping away at it, like week after week, engaging people in the best way that we know how, or in the best way that they feel comfortable. And so at this point, I have been noticing that some of our volunteers who have volunteered with us for years while they were taking a break during the pandemic are re-engaging. I know of a handful because they've already received both doses of the vaccine. So that's been really encouraging. And also just really like heartwarming to like see people that you have relationships with that you haven't seen in forever. So that's been amazing. And hopefully it just continues to build through the year until we can get to a point where there's some sense of immunity or sense of community safety around the pandemic. So I just expect the volunteer numbers to continue to grow. Right now, I would say there are direct ways and indirect ways to support us in a volunteer capacity. The direct ways, are kind of no-brainers, you all know. They tend to relate to our essential programs. So like food, our food programs has multiple positions for people to come in and help. We have our, daily meal preparation and meal serving that requires people to be here to do. We feed people 3 times a day year round. So it's there's a lot of positions that need to be filled on a day-to-day basis there. Also, we've, during the wintertime and going into spring and summer, we have a pretty high demand for sack lunch production. One of the reasons is while we serve a hot meal at Johnson Street Winter Shelter right now, we also serve another meal that is purely sack lunches. We also distribute sack lunches at the POV on a day-to-day basis for people on the go. And also our homeless outreach team uses sack lunches when they go and do outreach. So supporting the nutrition needs of folks living in the unsheltered environment is really huge. And it's going to continue to become more important now that we're expecting people who are staying at Johnson Street, who are going to transition to living outside in the springtime. So that's a good way. We've had some really creative volunteers come in and either prepare sack lunches on a weekly basis at the POV or leverage their own resources. So if they have like a community kitchen at their church or their business, they've made sack lunches there. So just kind of collaborating a little bit in a clever way is something to keep in mind. A lot of times we have resources available to us that we haven't really thought of. So I've been encouraging people to think about that stuff and to reach out if you have ideas, because we're all ears. Other things, we're going to expand our food pantry hours. Right now it's open twice a week. We're trying to get it open to 3 to 4 to 5. That pantry is designed to supplement the pantries of people living in the community who have their own homes. It's not necessarily for our residents here. It's a good example of how some of our resources can help people stay housed by, saving them money at the end of the month. So that's a great way to volunteer. It's good for, a group of people or to bring your kiddos along. You're just giving groceries to people. So that's always nice. Some other ways, like Sue and a few of our other staff have talked about, to get involved are supply drives. These are, the sky's the limit with the supply drive. You can get really creative with it. You can leverage your friends, your family, your neighbors, your business contacts, your civic groups, to gather these really essential items that we deliver to people or give people on a day-to-day basis. Particularly for the hot team in spring and summer, they're going to be taking a lot of supplies out. So everything from hygiene specific kit, like hygiene kits, so people can take care of their hygiene needs out on the streets, all the way to like camping equipment, things that can really help someone survive outside, backpacks, sleeping bags, tents, tarps, boots, batteries, like a can opener. We take for granted like how important a can opener is, but if you get a can of tuna, how do you open it if it doesn't have a pull tab? You know what I mean? Little things like that are really important, and really like, we distribute them daily. So, and then the last thing I'll say is we actually will need some volunteers to go out with the hot team as well. So it's a very unique volunteer position. It's an interesting way to engage with people experiencing poverty and homelessness in a different way, as opposed to serving food at the shelter. You can actually go out and do outreach alongside professionals who have relationships with people outside. So the sky's the limit, and really it's just whatever you're interested in it, reach out to me directly or go to our website under the volunteer tab. And it kind of, if I've done my job well, it'll get you started. So I know that was a lot of information. I was trying to keep it to 5 minutes. Do you guys have any questions about that? All right.
Cool. Well, everybody, so I've got the wrap up spot in our agenda today, and it's really to talk about like what we're looking at into the future. One of the things that we know at the Poverello Center is the pandemic is actually for us just the beginning of the crisis. We are really expecting the economic consequences of the pandemic to land really hard on the people we serve. A couple of things we know is that housing continues to be very, very, very tight in this community, as our friend Carissa from Homeward knows all too well. I was in a meeting recently with someone from Homeward that was talking about basically that we have a 0% vacancy rate, not just in the affordable housing market, but in the entire rental housing market. So you can imagine it's virtually impossible for people we serve to get into housing. There are some housing assets, as we all know from the reporting that's been happening in the community, that are going to be coming online in the next 2 to 3 years. Trinity and some of these other big affordable housing projects. Some of them we're really excited about. The Trinity project is going to have primitive supportive housing, which is going to really help a lot of the people that we work with directly. But again, that's a couple years out by the time that's going to be opening its doors. In the meantime, there's been a CDC moratorium on evictions because of the pandemic. Eventually, that's going to get lifted. And we assume at that moment, we are going to see a flood of people experiencing homelessness in our community. That there's people that are holding out of their housing right now because of that eviction moratorium. But when that ends, things could go bad really, really fast for people. So we've been excited to have the homeless outreach team staffed at such a high level because of CARES Act funding. And that runs out at the end of June. We feel like the hot team is like, they're on the front lines. They've been on the front lines of the pandemic, and they're going to be on the front lines of the kind of economic crisis that I think we're expecting to experience in our community as we move forward over the next 6 to 12 to 24 months, to be realistic in our communities. So we've set ourselves a pretty big goal. We want to be able to keep as many of those hot team members on as possible. And so that's going to be the real focus of our fundraising this entire spring. For about every $50,000 we can raise this spring, we're going to be able to keep a hot team member on board and working. And we'd really like to raise at least $200,000 so that we can keep that team up to at least 6 people moving through that next year. Frankly, we're going to be asking people to see if they could some 3-year pledges, because if we can keep that team staffed at that level for the next 3 years, we think that's really what we're going to need for them to help do that work, to help transition people from homelessness into having into these housing assets that are going to be coming online, or to help kind of interrupt that cycle, to get people into those into housing and not enter into homelessness. It's a big goal. And so we wanted to tell you all about it first as our kind of online supporters. There's a couple ways that you could jump in and kind of help us out with this. One is that in the mail later this month, they're going to be getting our annual appeal letter. It's going to be from our Christy. She's diligently working on that letter right now, and that's going to be hitting the mail here pretty soon. And we encourage you to take a hard look at how you can support us when you get that letter. Secondly, there's going to be 2 events we're going to be doing in the spring. One is online. It's Missoula Gives. It's Missoula's annual celebration of community giving. And that'll be May 6th and 7th. And we are hoping to we'd like to raise $50,000. We'd like to get one of those positions taken care of at Missoula Gives this year. You can help us do that by signing up and being one of those online champions for Missoula Gives. It's super easy. You just get a page on that website that you can share out to your friends, and encourage your friends to support the work and talk about why you support the Poverello Center. And so we'd invite you to join us in that way. The other way is, on March 11th last year, we had what I think was the last in-person fundraising event that happened in Missoula before COVID hit. It was our leadership breakfast. We raised $120,000 to support our medical respite program, which we were really excited about. And then COVID hit, I think a week later, and everything shut down. So we are actually going to try to do a socially distanced, combination socially distanced and online event on June 19th. We're calling Picnic for the POV. It's going to be done on the field of the Paddlehead, formerly the Osprey baseball team. They were doing those really great movie nights or movie days out there where they were broadcasting a movie on their big Jumbotron. We're going to do basically the same thing. We're going to spread everybody out, socially distanced on the lawn there. The program will be up on the Jumbotron. And so it's a good way to support us there. And if you would be interested in being one of our table captains, or I guess picnic blanket captains, we would invite you to join us in that way. Our goal there, again, is going to be to try to raise by the end of June enough money to keep the homeless outreach team fully staffed for the next 3 years if we can. So the goal there for this year is going to be $200,000. For the 3 years, it's $600,000. It's probably the biggest single fundraising campaign the Poverello Center's tried to do since we built our new building. If you would like to help out either as a champion during Missoula Gives, or as a picnic blanket captain or table captain for our Picnic for the POV, please email us at donations@thepoverellocenter.org, and we will get you all the information you need to do it, or either of those things. They're both super simple. I think some of you have actually been table captains before, who I'm seeing on this table here, or on this call here. So it's not hard. It's actually quite fun. And we'll have a socially distanced option at the ballpark. We'll also be able to have people, if they feel more comfortable doing a Zoom online version, people can access it that way. We'll have food there. It'll be a lot of fun out on the Osprey, or sorry, it's not the Ospreys anymore, the Paddleheads baseball diamond there. So that's really the big deal moving forward, is that we need to make that happen, is to, as a community, investing in the hot team right now is critical for us to address this kind of pending economic crisis that is going to be hitting us as the economic consequences of COVID and this pandemic move forward. So any questions about any of that, or really anything that we've talked about today?
And Jesse, I asked Carissa, since we have our wonderful partner from Homeward on, if she'd be willing to give an update on the Trinity project and where it's at. And she said she'd be happy to do that. So do you want to have her do that now?
Sure, why not?
Unless anyone has questions about the events. I'm excited for Picnic at the POV, Picnic for the POV.
Picnic for the POV.
I'm excited. I also have to, my other shout out for Zach and all the hard work you're doing is when I was in college, I did weekly volunteering at the Poverello Center, and that was the old shelter, the little one over downtown, and it was like the best part of my week. So
Thank
good
you.
work with the volunteers. So y'all, the Trinity project is moving forward. We did have the Missoula City Council and county commissioners are all on board with funding needed. And so we should be breaking ground this spring on Trinity, which includes 2 properties, Cooley and Mullen Road, right next to the detention center. And for this conversation, I think especially that property at Mullen Road is the important one because it includes those 30 permanent supportive housing units. And what that means is that we will be trying to get those who are at highest risk of dying on our streets into homes, people that are part of the coordinated entry that the HOT team is working with, trying to stay connected with when we lose them, when Johnson Street closes. It'll be really important a big part of what they're doing is just trying to keep tabs on those folks so that we can connect them when we have resources available. And that's a big piece of what those permanent supportive housing units will look like. And for this group, just to know that, we work really closely with folks like the HOT team and the Poverello Center staff to make sure that the design of that building and the navigation center that will be a part of that building fits with the needs of the people rather than the needs of institutions or buildings or developers. And so thinking about things like trying to have few corners and having a safe, secure outdoor space. So for those individuals who've not lived indoors for the majority of the most recent years of their life, they may not be comfortable having a teeny tiny 4 bedrooms or a 4-wall bedroom, and they may need to go outside and have a safe space where they can do that. And all of that kind of design, those design concepts, those people-centered design concepts are a part of this, these conversations. And the Poverello Center team has been a really integral part of providing support there, and are certainly parts of the conversations when we think through what that navigation center will look like. And the city is going to be the primary leaseholder on that navigation center and managing what services will be available for that. But similar to the Johnson Street property, because those permanent supportive housing units and the navigation center will be low barrier, we should be able to then address people's other challenges if they want to work through addiction challenges, or if they need to manage other things that they're working through. Those will all be possible in partnership with the folks working at the Poverello Center. So the problem is it's a 2-year development. So we're looking at hopefully fall 2023. And so as Amy said, that doesn't solve the problem for next winter that the Poverello Center staff are already trying to manage. And so any kind of support that you all are able to give with the events that Jesse just gave is really going to help us bridge to a point where then we can solve some of it with the Trinity project. Certainly isn't going to be a silver bullet, but it's over 200 units that should be affordable for folks to rent. But we've got some time, and we need the Poverello Center staff, we need the HOT team to be there for supporting these individuals until we can get that in place. So
Thank you very much, Chris. And that's right. I mean, I think just the HOT team is the pathway that a lot of these our most vulnerable neighbors are going to access resources like Trinity and some of those other housing developments that are going to be coming forward. Any questions for Carissa or for any of us as we think about moving into the spring and the next few years?
This is Lynn, and I don't have a question, but I had just learned some information that might be of interest if you don't know already, which is that the state's emergency housing assistance program is looking at starting up again at the end of this month. And that will be assistance potentially for those renters who are going to be facing eviction at the end of the deadline in March. And it's going to be a little different than it was in the fall. It's going to be 100% of their rent as opposed to a cost share. And it's going to include utilities. A support for utilities. I don't know how retroactive it will be, if it will go back to the beginning of January, but the state is hiring 23 semi-permanent staff to replace the temporary staff that they used in the fall, which should make the program run smoother. And it will be something I think that could be of interest to, certainly to all of us who want to help keep people in their houses. So I just learned that today. Maybe you know already, but I thought it was very useful.
Yeah, and we were actually in a good conversation with our friends over at HRC about a lot of that. They run some similar programs and earn access there too.
Mhm.
And so I think, yeah, as much as we can get that information out to folks and help them not get into homelessness, because of course, when you get into homelessness, it becomes much harder to get out of it. So we'll certainly want to be communicating those types of resources out as best as possible. I think one of the fears that we have is just because of how, I guess, crazy the housing market is right now in Missoula is that there could be a potential for a lot of housing to get unloaded in from rental into non-rental or housing, and that's going to be a real challenge. We just saw 300 or 30 units out in Bonner basically evaporate overnight of pretty affordable rental housing, and those are real challenges that we're facing as a community. So. So Lynn, thank you very much. That was really helpful. Any other questions, thoughts? Again, if you would like to sign up to be and some of you on this call are like on our list to have a direct reach out anyways. So I wouldn't be surprised if you're going to be getting a phone call or an email from one of us in the next week or so. But if you want to volunteer, either as a champion for Missoula Gives or a table captain for the Picnic for the POV, please email donations@thepoverellocenter.org. That email address is also in the chat. Yeah, there's no other questions. I think we can wrap up. Bill, I saw you come off of mute. Do you have a question?
Well, I don't want to hold everybody, but maybe at some time we can hear more about the legislative bills that are working their way through that are limiting individual communities' response to low-income housing. And for some of us, it's perplexing why that has to be done when the community is willing to do it. But that's a big. I see Chris's hand is up there. And Chris would certainly know a lot. It may be too much to talk about right now, but that's such a troubling trend.
Yeah.
I can give a quick shout out about HB 259, Jesse, if that would be okay, or is that not?
Sure, absolutely. Go for it.
HB 259 is likely to pass, and that's going to inhibit a local municipality from making inclusionary zoning, which is basically a requirement of a percentage of homes in any new development to be made affordable. The good news is, while that's really frustrating and it's an interesting political move for folks that usually say, no, local government should have all the control. But the good news is the city of Missoula already had a version of inclusionary zoning written into their housing policy, and it was all incentivized. And so what that means is it would be optional for a developer to opt in, and then they would get some sort of incentive, a fee waiver, where they can build more. What is that called? Just went out of my head. A couple of different kind of motivating incentives for a developer. That was already written in, and that will still be legal. With HB 259, it was just the mandatory inclusionary zoning that will be restricted. So the good news is that the plan that the city has in place is still possible. And if we can do some samples and show that it works in a few years, maybe we can get HB 259 turned around.
Well, thank you, Carissa, for that. And yeah, thanks, Bill, for the reminder on that stuff. We will probably do some communications later in the month just about where things are standing in terms of legislation that we care about. We are lucky to have a close relationship with some really great community activists that are working on up in Helena right now. So we will definitely get some more communication out about that before the legislative session ends. I think that's it, unless anybody has any other questions. We really appreciate all of you so much for coming on and talking to us and giving us your perspective and hearing about what we're up to. We couldn't do the work we do without supporters like you. So you're really, part of our team. And so we appreciate you. The next online supporter update will be in 1 month. And that will be, I'm just scrolling through my calendar right now, but it'll be April 6th, it looks like, is the next online supporter update. At that one, we'll be checking in more about what's going on moving forward in our community. And probably, I think we've been looking to get an update about our food programs in for a while. So I think that was what we're kind of targeting for one of the next things. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you in the community soon.